Welcome, everybody. My name is Alberni-Clayoquot, and I'm the program coordinator with the Tofino Community Food Initiative. The Tofino Community Food Initiative operates on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of Clayoquot First Nation, and this is where I'm joining from today. And I just like to invite anyone that's participating in this workshop today or watching the recording to just take a moment and reflect on whose traditional lands you're joining from today and the impact that colonization has had in all of our communities on Indigenous food sovereignty, ways of knowing, and access to land. And also that when we refer to agriculture or gardening, this encompasses a really narrow view on food cultivation that doesn't reflect the diversity of cultural knowledge within our region. So today we're joined from Connie Kuramato of Gardens on the Go for a very timely workshop. It's August 24th when we're recording this on seed saving. And co-hosting this workshop is the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District as part of a project to foster more collaboration amongst our coastal community gardens and create more resiliency for these important community spaces. We just want to thank the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust for their generous support towards this workshop series and all of the support that they've offered to our coastal community gardens throughout the years. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Connie, to talk about seed saving.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so when I'm growing my garden out here, it's a wonderful way to provide food for myself and for my neighbors and for my family. And I really love the feeling of food security, having a garden outside, even if it doesn't provide all of my food needs. And not everyone can have a big garden, but there is something to be said about putting energy into the food that you grow. And I believe you get that energy back. Also, it unites you with like-minded people who are also growing food. And so if there's something that you can't grow, maybe somebody else that is growing it can grow and you can trade. So there's a great deal of spin-offs. There's being outside, being in touch with nature, seeing the bees, and there's snakes in my garden now, which is very cool. And being part of the cycle of life is just really obvious when you're in a garden, and you can really become in touch with it because the garden can be a microcosm for the entire universe of nature, really. You have life there, you have death, and you have regeneration. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the regeneration that can happen in your garden. So a lot of times, I didn't understand the importance of seed saving at first, and the whole connection that it gives you to the life cycle of the plants. But the longer I'm doing it, the longer I see how important it is. And one of the reasons it's really important is because every climate and every ecosystem is just that slightly different. And I've grown food in a lot of different places, and I've really noticed how things can really be different from one soil to a next, and one climate to a next, from Port Alberni to Qualicum, from Qualicum to Nanaimo, from Nanaimo to Campbell River area, even on this island. From here to back east, it's so different. From here, the Yukon, it's very, very different. And so one of the best things I think about saving seeds is that you end up with seeds and consequently plants that are better adapted to your particular conditions. My garden is even much, much different from a friend's garden up the street and down the street, but our gardens are more alike than the gardens, my garden and Tofino Gardens, or my gardens and Port Alberni Gardens. So you can develop kind of a regional situation, and certainly all of our gardens on Vancouver Island are probably more alike than gardens in the Lower Mainland, gardens in Manitoba, gardens in Saskatchewan and Ontario. So by developing some local seed sources, we are also adding to our food security. Plants are incredibly generous. You can start with one kale plant and you can end up with thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds. And what you can do as a gardener, and what you should be doing if you're selecting seeds, is picking your very best plants that are to let go to seed, because they are the ones that will be the strongest and best in your climate. They will at least have those genes that have given them the adaptability in your climate, the best chance in your climate. So you want to save seeds from your best plants, not the plants that went to seed, bolted prematurely and went to seed. You want to save your seeds from your very best plants. So today we'll talk a bit about that, and we'll also talk about how to do that. We'll talk about cross-pollination. I see by monitoring a lot of the gardening groups that there's some confusion about how cross-pollination works. And so I think that's a really important concept for you to know. And so I'd like to share a presentation with you here. And so I will share this screen with you. And we'll talk about saving seeds. So again, one of the most important reasons to save seeds is that it will improve your garden, and it will improve your neighbor's garden and your community's garden if you're able to save some seeds, because you are saving the best, which means the best adapted seeds for your garden. Seeds are really miracles of survival. They found seeds that were very, very old that were preserved, and still they sprouted. And when you are saving seeds, you're joining thousands of farmers and gardeners before you in preserving the best that you have to offer for future generations. So it's quite important that you start to consider the generations that come after, and with our changing climate, how important that will be to have the best plants you can possibly have in your garden and save seeds from them, because the best plants have probably also shown some resilience to the varying conditions, because most of our gardens are undergoing some really varying conditions right now. So there's a few things that you really need to remember when you start to save seeds. And the first thing, and I think it's one of the most important things, is that especially for beginners and people who don't have a lot of room to experiment, if you have a lot of room to experiment, then you might try some different things. But if you want success in saving seeds and having your seeds be somewhat like you expect them to be, having them grow plants that you will somewhat expect, it's best to save open pollinated seeds. You can tell if they're open pollinated seeds. Usually next to the seed listing in a catalog, it will say OP, capital O, capital P, which stands for open pollinated. And so they'll really give you the best results. Also, usually if you get seeds from that someone has saved in their garden after a couple of years, they will probably be open pollinated. Heirloom plants will tend to be open pollinated. And so really good to know the seeds you're saving. This is a really nice little envelope that was put out by Comox Valley Seed Savers, I believe, and it has all these things. If you save the seeds, all these different things to fill in so that you really get the information that you need and you record that information, and the people who get your seeds also are aware of the information, and it helps them decide whether they're good seeds for them to grow as well. Again, always, always, always save seeds from your best plants. So your plants should be vigorous, they should be healthy, they should be disease resistant, and ones that are really adapted to your climate are ones that will really grow well. You also want to taste them if you can before you save the seeds, and that's kind of difficult with some things. But if you have a whole row of beets and all of them taste a little bit off, maybe it's not a good year to save seed from beets because they might have gotten strong tasting from the too much heat, or kale is another good example that you could think about. When saving seeds from kale, I pull up all the plants that get woolly aphids. I pull up all the plants that don't thrive in any way. And so over the years, what has happened by doing that is that I've only saved seeds from mildew resistant, aphid resistant kale. And so over the years, I've had less and less and less problems with both woolly aphids, which is usually what attacks the kale. And I've also had less problems with any kind of powdery mildew. So by saving only the plants that never got attacked by aphids, I eventually bred an aphid resistant, or those tendencies to be aphid resistant in my kale. Another thing that we have to remember here in northern climates is that if we want to save seeds from something, they'll have to be early maturing cultivars, because we only have a limited amount of time to grow these plants. And if we want to save seeds from them, it'll take even longer for them to mature. So they'll complete their life cycle to the point of us being able to eat them, and in less than half the time it will take for those same plants to develop seed in many cases. So we also have to contend with the rain, some of us more than others, later in the season. And sometimes if the seed isn't fully developed, if the seed pod isn't fully developed, the seeds can either rot or they can sprout if they're not harvested before it rains. So that adds a little bit more complication. So that's another reason to plant really early maturing cultivars so that you can get them to the point where you can save seeds from them. So give them your best shot. The healthy mother is a healthy baby, and a healthy mother is a well-fed mother, well-nourished mother. So it's no different. Plants and people are no different in that, is that you really want to nourish your plants well. So the plants that you decide to save, all your plants should be nourished well, but pay special attention to your mothers, the plants that you've decided to save for seed, because if you provide them with your best soil, your best compost, when you start to decide which plant's going to seed, pick the best one and then feed it. Feed it some compost, make sure it gets water, make sure it gets care right throughout its life cycle until it forms the seed, because that mother plant will give everything you give to it. It will give to its babies. It will give to its seeds. I had a turnip go to seed in my garden, and when I finally harvested it, it was a huge turnip. When I finally harvested it, the turnip itself was completely empty. It was an empty shell. That plant had translocated all its nutrients from the turnip into the seeds. So it produced a lot of seeds, and those seeds, I bet, are quite vigorous. So the other thing that you need to be aware of is which plants cross-pollinate and which plants self-pollinate. So some plants will have to be isolated because they easily cross-pollinate with other plants in the same species. And you will still get a plant, but it can be unpredictable what you get. So there's different flower structures, and imperfect flowers are either male or female. So that means they have either the female sex organ that will receive the pollen here, and then the pollen germinates and it fertilizes the eggs, and then the plant forms an ovary around the eggs to protect it, or builds up the ovary around the eggs to protect it. And squash is a good example of this. It has both the female flowers that have the little fruit behind them, and the male flowers that just have the anthers and the stamens and have pollen on them. So what happens here is the bee lands on the male flower, then flies over to the female flower, and it gets pollinated. So plants that have imperfect flowers will tend to cross-pollinate very easily because they can't pollinate themselves. With a perfect flower that has both male and female sex organs in the same flower, it's a little bit more likely that the plant can pollinate itself. There are some conditions and there are some situations that prevent the pollen from one plant pollinating the same flower, but it still is more likely that it will not cross-pollinate if it's a bisexual flower. So if it has both male and female parts to it. So self-pollinating plants have functional male and female sex organs located within the same flower. It's said to be a complete or a perfect flower. And here it is, the pistil and the stigma. The pistil is comprised of the stigma, the style, and there's the ovary. My kids got really freaked out when I told them that eating an apple was eating the ovary of the apple tree, and that's another one of those things I probably should have never said. But that's actually what's happening, is that plants have ovaries, and that's the fruit that we eat. And really, it's not so much for us, is to protect the seeds that are located inside that. That's why this plant has formed this fruit, is to protect the seeds inside it, or in some cases to spread the seeds inside it, because as it passes through animals' intestinal systems and digestive systems, and then is deposited someplace with fertilizer, that's a way of spreading the species. So here's imperfect flowers need some sort of cross-pollination. So these flowers, the other flowers, when we looked at the other flowers, previous. When we looked at these flowers, if you give these flowers a good shake, lots of times the pollen will fall onto the stigma and germinate and self-pollinate. So one good example of this is tomato plants. If you shake the flower of a tomato plant, most likely what will happen is that the pollen will fall off the anther, and it will fall onto the stigma, and it will self-pollinate. Now, in big commercial greenhouses where there's no bees, they actually used to use, it looked like an electric toothbrush actually, and it would just vibrate, and it would hit on the bract of the tomato and where all the flowers were, and it just shook it enough so that it would pollinate. And when we have something like a squash, though, you can tell the difference between a male and female flower because the male flower just doesn't have the fruit behind it, and the female flower does. So that's a female squash flower with the squash behind it, and the male squash flower does not have the squash behind it. So it just has the stamens with the pollen on it, and the female part has the receptive stigma. So self-pollinating plants have complete or perfect flowers, and pollination can occur inside each individual flower, not contingent on insects or wind, although wind can assist the pollen from falling onto the stigma. Cross-pollinating plants, actually, some of them will have perfect flowers, but some of them actually have a bit of an incompatibility with their own pollen. And the reason for that is that plants benefit from genetic diversity. And so those plants are relying on insects to bring pollen from another plant of the same type. So there are plants, also self-pollinating plants, that have imperfect flowers, and plants have either male or female flowers. So here's some of the plants that will tend to self-pollinate. And this does not happen all the time. Sometimes there's a wayward bee or something gets in there that pollinates it before the plant self-pollinates. But generally, these plants will self-pollinate. Peas, beans, tomatoes, and lettuce will mainly self-pollinate, although I have seen some changes. They're very small. Some instances of them not self-pollinating, they've been very small. But these will generally cross-pollinate. So squash, because they have imperfect flowers, the bees will pick any old squash and go to the next flower and pollinate it. So squash actually are quite promiscuous in a way because they can wildly cross with other members of their same family. Spinach also has male and female flowers, and so they will definitely cross-pollinate. Carrots will cross-pollinate, and it's very hard to save carrot seed because carrots will also cross-pollinate with Queen Anne's lace, and so which is a wild weed. And in my experience, what's happened when carrots have cross-pollinated with Queen Anne's lace is you get the worst of both worlds. You don't get a pretty flower, and you get a really awful tasting root. So it really doesn't work really well. Celery cross-pollinates, but interestingly enough, I've actually had some pretty good celeries that have arisen from from cross-pollination. They've actually been, I have a summer, it's called summer celery or Chinese celery or cutting celery that's quite hardy, and it crossed with my larger Utah celeries. And so the summer celery or cutting celery tends to be very small. And so what I got was something that was in between. So it was a little bit bigger than the cutting celery, but it was more hardy than the Utah celery. So it was kind of an interesting cross. So again, if you have the room to experiment, sometimes you can develop cultivars that suit you better than what's available. Parsley will cross-pollinate, but there's not that many types of it, so it's not that important. And sunflowers will cross-pollinate, and sometimes the results are actually really delightful when they cross-pollinate. So, you know, it depends on what you're looking for and what you want, but you should go into this with the knowledge that at least these things will cross-pollinate, and they might not be, when you plant the seeds as a result of this cross-pollination, they might not be what you expect. So just go through it with that in mind. Vegetables belonging to the same species can crossbreed. And so one of the techniques that can be used is to maintain purity of seed, is to allow only one cultivar of a given species to flower at any time. You can also isolate the plants far from each other so that they don't cross-pollinate, but that gets difficult because it doesn't only depend on what you're growing and letting go to seed, but also what your neighbors are going to seed. And different plants have different isolation distances. So sometimes you might not get exactly what you have hoped you would get if your plants cross-pollinate. And unfortunately, some of my favorite plants will actually cross-pollinate. So turnip can cross with Chinese cabbage, Asian mustards, including Mizuna and Kiona, Brassica rapa, so the brassica, which is just broccoli, which is just the fine-stemmed broccoli, the small-headed fine-stemmed broccoli. And all these plants can also cross. So broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kohlrabi, collards, and kale. And these plants can actually cross. The only one that I tend to save seeds from every year is kale. But some of the years that I've let both broccoli and kale go to seed, I've actually gotten some quite wonderful and delicious crosses. So again, it depends on what, how much you want to experiment, and it's kind of fun to experiment. My mustards also crossed, and I really got some interesting ones, and I'm in the process of saving the seeds from the best ones again. So you can almost develop your own varieties. Like I don't like mustard greens that have hairy leaves. And so, I'm sure my mustard's crossed with my turnip, and that's why they have hairy leaves. But by pulling the ones with hairy leaves out and either feeding them to my animals or steaming them so that I don't notice that they're hairy leaves, I have gotten some really delicious crosses. But just be aware that these will cross with one another. The other strategy, again, is to just grow one of these to seed. So broccoli, grow broccoli 1 year, let it go to seed, collect the seeds, grow cabbage the following year, let it go to seed, but don't let your other things go to seed, and collect the seeds. And so every year, let a different brassica go to seed. And because brassica seeds last 4 years, easily last 4 years, that can be a really good strategy. We've got, and another thing that's good about saving the brassicas is most of these are hardy. And so things like Brussels sprouts, a lot of my broccoli, certainly the kale, they won't go to seed until the following year. And so you can actually have cultivars that are longer to develop, like the Brussels sprouts, and have them go to seed the following year. So if you have a short season broccoli, you can let that go to seed right in the summer, and would be harvesting. I'm harvesting some of my broccoli seed now, but my Brussels sprout seed won't be ready for a while. So you can stagger it like that as well. But let's start with the really easy seeds, and that take very little background or very little knowledge, or very little fuss about isolation, very little knowledge of the species that you're dealing with, how they're related and how they're not related. And so these are the easiest ones because, again, they will tend to self-pollinate. I have had peppers that have cross-pollinated, and then when I planted the seeds, I got slightly spicier bell peppers than I expected. Again, it's kind of fun to experiment with peppers as long as you like both hot and sweet. Or you could just grow hot peppers one year because they dry so nicely and they preserve so nicely, and then grow sweet peppers the following year. But peas, beans, lettuce, peppers, and tomatoes are still going to be your easiest. Peas, what I like to do with peas, they generally mature pretty easily, pretty early. So it's really likely you'll be able to save seeds from them. And they tend to be self-pollinating because the flowers are so tight that the pollen will tend to fall on the stigma very quickly, the least little breeze or, shaking of the vines or anything, way before the bees even get in there. So you generally don't need to isolate peas. You might want to try this Champion of New England pea seed, and because this dates back to 1840s, and it's a really delicious crunchy pea. The vines grow really tall, so they're really abundant and really really productive. And you can probably get these seeds at some seedy Saturday. So how do you save these seeds? What I usually do is I go through the crop and enjoy the first peas. I pick the first peas that come out and I enjoy them, because when you pick the first pods, it sends a message to the plant to produce more. So picking your first set of peas is wonderful. And then what I do after I've picked and eaten these peas, also to make sure they're something that is tasty enough that you'd like to save them, select your most vigorous plant. So in a line, say, of 20 pea plants, what I'll do is I'll let one whole plant go to seed instead of a bit here and a bit there, because then you are able to continually harvest from the other plants. And, if you want to save more seeds, of course, you'll let 2 plants go to seed or 3 plants go to seed. But I find that letting the whole plant go to seed is a strategy to ensure that you get some seeds, because of course, you're going to want to eat some of your peas too. And so by planting a couple of extra plants with the idea that you're going to let a couple go to seed, it'll provide you with seed for the next year, plus lots to eat. And by letting some of the peas just go to seed early and let them fill out the pods and let the pods dry early, you will then be assured that you will have some seed for the next year. So I just try to let the seeds dry on the vine. If they get hit by a sprinkler or something, it's generally no big deal. As long as they're still in the pod, they'll dry out. If you feel like that they're getting too wet, if there's too much of a dew, if there's rain expected just when there's lots of dry peas on the vine, one strategy is to harvest those 2 plants, the whole plants, bring them inside and hang them upside down. And a lot of the nutrients will translocate out of the plants into the peas, into the seeds. And that way you'll get the most out of your seeds, and your seeds are more likely to be viable. In ideal conditions, you wouldn't harvest until the pods are dry, but that is another strategy if heavy rains are threatening, or it's always good to make sure the pea pods are quite full before you harvest the entire vine. Maybe even starting to turn a little bit brown, but this is really helpful in the short season areas or really rainy climates, is to bring the entire vine in and let it dry. You can also string the pods and bring them inside to dry. And you can see some of these are still quite green, but they do have they're starting to get that dried look about them. And you might not get as many nutrients translocated from the plant into the pea seeds like this, but sometimes for space saving sake, this also will work for you. Once they're really dry, and you can tell they're really dry because when you crunch the pod, the peas will fall out of it very easily. Make sure that you keep a label with all of this all the time. It's really easy to forget which seeds these are. And I've done it way too many times. So make sure that a label kind of follows your seeds throughout the entire process. And I like to use flagging tape for this purpose. So early on, I'll flag the plants that I want to go to seed with the name of the cultivar, and so the genus and species name, or the cultivar name, like Sugar Ann or Sugar Daddy with peas. And I'll actually label it right on the plant. I'll label it on some flagging tape on the plant, so that flagging tape follows that plant all through its life cycle. And then I can even, when I put the seeds in a bag, I can even put that flagging tape in the bag with the seeds so that that label stays with it. Always store your seeds in a cool, dry place, because seeds actually are still alive, and they consist of an embryo and food for that embryo. And if we keep the seeds cool, what will happen is it lowers their metabolic rate. And if it lowers their metabolic rate and lowers their respiration, they'll use less food. That food is important for the seed once you plant it, for it to have enough energy to burst through the soil and emerge into the sunlight so that it can start photosynthesizing. If that little seed runs out of food before it actually emerges, then it will never reach the light, and it will never be able to get to a place where it can sustain itself by photosynthesis and grow. So it's very important that the seed have as much, that you maintain that food for the seed as well as you can by keeping the seed cool and also dry, because if it gets wet, then it's likely to start the germination process. And if it starts the process and doesn't have the opportunity to finish the process, that seed will also be dead and not produce a viable plant. Beans is another type of seed that's really easy to save seeds from. And on the West Coast, it would be really important in any rainier climate to get really early maturing beans, because you do get the rains that you don't get the heat to mature beans, and you also get the rains that will moisten the seeds prematurely that you're trying to dry. So get a really early cultivars, and that would be your best bet. There's bush beans and there's pole beans, and some places scarlet runners. And on the coast, scarlet runners are one of the ones that do the best in my experience from pole beans, that and purple peacock. Bush beans are a little bit more forgiving. Their time is very short. I find the purple royalty beans germinate even in cool soils, so that's a good choice. And green beans purple beans don't need as much heat as green beans. Green beans don't need as much heat as yellow beans. So you can choose according to your climate what's going to mature for you. Royal purple beans do great in cool soils, so I always plant these first. So they mature in 50 days, which is a nice maturity date, and you likely will be able to save some seeds from these. And I really like the purple. Brother Nature Seeds is a seed company that's down island some. I think it's around the Metchosin area, but it's quite easy to save seeds from royal purple beans. Lazy housewife bean is another really nice bean, and it's a long season bean. If you are living on the coast or someplace where you don't have the heat units, this might not be the bean for you, but In places where pole beans do good, this is a really prolific, amazingly prolific bean. And because it produces all these beans in clusters. And so one would presume that the name was because it's so easy to pick. But this bean has been around since 1810, and certainly people don't keep cultivars around unless they're really prolific and really tasty. That's another suggestion. Ferrari is 55 days and has good disease resistance. So trying a bean like this might be also good because it matures really quickly. And if it matures really quickly, it'll also dry in the pod very quickly, more quickly than ones that have a longer maturity date. Ferrari also has good disease resistance, so good in wet climates. It's nice to allow the pods to dry before harvesting. And so, but that will take about 6 weeks after eating stage. So if we're looking at a bean that matures in 50 days, to absolutely get dry pods, you have to add another 6 weeks. So that's quite significant. And so in some climates, it'll be more difficult to save beans unless, again, you kind of harvest the whole plant and hang it upside down. With beans, just like peas, I like to harvest the first crop to eat because generally they're the best eating as well. And it will stimulate the vines to keep producing. And after a good feed or a couple of feeds, just let a couple of plants go to seed and let the beans just develop in there. They start to get really fat in the pods. They're not that great eating when they're that fat in the pods anyway. And then that pod will continue to dry to something that is very crunchy and crispy and brittle. And that's the great stage to harvest it at. But again, if you can't, here's a bean plant that's hanging upside down in a dry location. And that will continue to translocate some of its nutrients from the rest of the plant into the beans. So just hang them until the pods are brown. And you might not get quite the success rate with these seeds, but you will get a good percentage of seeds that will actually be mature enough for you to plant the next year. Cleaning bean seed is really simple. You just crunch up the pods and then put the seeds in a cool, dry place. Lettuce is another easy one. And lettuce is easy because not only will it tend to self-pollinate, it also is really easy because it matures really quickly. So you can get a mature head of lettuce in a shorter time than a lot of other garden crops. It's also very hardy, so you can start it early. It goes into the fall well. Another thing about lettuce that's nice is the seeds are sort of protected in a little, in the flower for a long time. And they have a little fluff on them that will distribute them throughout your garden. But until that stage, they're kind of protected from extreme elements. And so they can mature quite nicely. I really like this Drunken Woman lettuce, and it's a delicious lettuce. It's easy to grow. It holds up in all kinds of conditions. I've grown it in very hot climates. I've grown it in really cool climates. And it matures in about 55 days. So this is one, it's open pollinated, which is what you want to watch for. And it works quite well. Juster lettuce is another really good one. Any of these speckled lettuces tend to be very good. Another good clue for good lettuces to grow for seeds is anything that you see in the seed catalog that was developed by Frank Morton. Frank Morton from Wild Garden Seeds in Oregon. He's done some amazing lettuce seed, greens in general. And what he does what's called lettuce torture trials. And lettuce torture trials means that he has planted lettuce in the worst possible conditions and then saved the best seed from the best plants in those worst possible conditions. So he's saved seed from extremely resilient plants that were successful, not only successful under really harsh conditions. Then he also did a taste test with it. And he fed this lettuce to teenagers who decided which lettuce to save because it tasted good and which lettuce not to save because it didn't taste good. So anything that has been developed by Frank Morton, and he worked on a lot of these spotted varieties, are really good lettuces. They'll tend to be very resilient, and you can plant them really early. Even if you plant them inside really early, they don't mind if the light levels are a little bit low inside, and then plant them out when your climate allows, and quite easy to save seed. I have saved quite a bit of seed from my different lettuce plants, but I also have just allowed so many plants to just go from seed. And I personally love the little surprise plants that come up all over the place. And if they're in a good place for them to grow, I let them grow there. If they're not in such a good place to grow, then I harvest them and eat them. Sometimes I'll transplant them, but generally I'll just let them grow where they are or harvest them and eat them. Lettuce goes to seed early, although you do not want to harvest the plants that go to seed first. Growing lettuce, the whole goal is the plants that you want to have plants that don't go to seed too early. So plants that say will bolt, and this is a picture of lettuce plants bolting. You can see how they get really tall, and the internodal length, so the length between the leaves gets really long. And so you can tell sometimes when a plant is about to go to seed because it starts to get tall. And that's when you can think about, do I really want this plant? Do I want to save the seeds from this plant? So if it is a plant that's well nourished, if it has reached full size, if it's tasty, then yes, you might want to let that plant go to seed. Really, you want your tastiest, best plants to go to seed, and you eat the other ones, because that means you are sort of saving for the future, for future generations, for your future gardens and for future generations. So if you save seeds that bolt when they're very, very small, if you save a lettuce plant, say a lettuce plant only gets 6 inches tall and only has 10 leaves on it, and they're all small and scrawny. And, you know, I often hear people say, oh, my lettuce didn't do very good, but I can save seed from it. Well, if your lettuce didn't do very good, you probably don't want to save seed from it, because that seed is probably not going to be not going to produce great lettuce when you plant it. It will have the propensity to do the same thing as the mother did, which is bolt under certain conditions. So you want to save seeds again from your best plants. In the case of lettuce, you want to save seeds from the plants that get the biggest before they go to seed. In things like tomatoes, on the other hand, you want to save seeds from your first and earliest tomato, because the whole thing is you want earlier tomatoes, you want earlier beans, you want earlier peas, but you don't want your lettuce to bolt too early. So there's a difference of the types of plants that you save seed from. So try not to select plants, when lettuce plants, to save to seed that have bolted because of overcrowding, because of poor soil, because of heat, because of lack of water. And you can see these plants here are very small. It's really not worth saving seeds from these guys, because probably when you plant them, the plants that will grow will also be very small, and probably they have a greater chance anyway of going to seed too early. So these nice, big, best, tastiest plants, those are the ones that you want to let to go to seed. And make sure that you taste them too, because there's no use saving seeds from a lettuce that is very, very bitter under heat if you have very hot conditions. So you want to save the seeds that do the best in your climate, in your garden. So this is what lettuce seed looks like. This is what lettuce plant looks like when it goes to seed. All plants get really big when they go to seed. And my theory is that they get big so that they can scatter their seeds away from the mother plant somewhat. And so when you start to see this fuzz in the flower heads here, then when you pull that fuzz out, you'll see the seed at the end of the fuzz. So lettuce plants are just like dandelion plants, is they have this fuzz that will help distribute them in the wind. So when you harvest lettuce seed, you do have to separate. It's good to separate the little fluff from the seed, or else it's quite hard to handle. Peppers are one that are kind of worth a try, if only because they're so darn easy to save seeds from. Really, probably the easiest. Even if you do get a little bit of cross-pollination, I just happen to love peppers a whole lot, for one thing, and I love their diversity. But sometimes you can get a good cross with peppers, and generally you're always going to get something that is edible, unless of course it's really, really hot. Like if you crossed a Carolina Reaper or something, if it inadvertently crossed with a bell pepper, it might be pretty hot. But still, peppers are, I think, worth saving seeds from. So banana peppers usually mature faster and are more productive. So you get a lot more peppers off banana-shaped peppers, whether they're hot or sweet. Bell peppers will take a bit longer in your garden and will generally have lower yields unless you're in a really hot climate. Then the yields can be a bit higher. Also remember that peppers are a perennial plant. So if you can bring them inside, you have to bring them inside because they're not frost hardy. But if you can bring them inside and nurture them through the winter, which is not always an easy task because sometimes they get weak and sometimes they get covered with aphids. But I have stripped the leaves completely off a pepper plant when it got covered with aphids. And when the leaves came back, they were clean. So if you overwinter peppers, what can happen is that the next year you'll get a much bigger and better crop from those same peppers. So give it lots of bright light, make sure it stays watered, and you can overwinter peppers. Some of the peppers I really like to grow are this bull's horn, Corno di Toro rosa, and red bull's horn. And it is a very delicious sweet red pepper, and crunchy, and it lasts well in the fridge. And it also will mature way more quickly than any bell pepper. But if you like bell peppers, and remember that green peppers are generally immature colored peppers. So a red pepper, when it's unripe, is green. A yellow pepper, when it's unripe, is green. An orange pepper, when it's unripe, is green. So when you're saving seeds from peppers, it is best to save seeds from ripe peppers. And so California Wonder is a really good pepper because it ripens really early. So it's one of the most reliable colored peppers. And If it's colored, remember, it is ready to save the seeds from because it is fully mature when it's ripe. So California Wonder is a good one to grow. It is open pollinated and ready 75 days from transplanting. So if you start them early inside, or if you overwinter some plants and get them out, my overwintered plants, I had peppers in June from them, colored peppers at the end of June from them. So really nice option for short seasons, especially if you can rig up a light or two. Red Ruffle is another open pollinated producer. And this pepper is a really good producer, even under slightly less than ideal conditions. On the West Coast, you will definitely have to do these in greenhouses or inside because there's just not enough heat usually. Other places, peppers, even in other places, they benefit from staying warm as long as possible. Chili de arbol is a Tabasco chili, and hot peppers do better in cool climates than bell peppers. So if you like hot peppers, you're in luck. And really, these are ones that are really easy to save from seeds. And I'm not really sure why hot peppers tend to be more prolific than bell peppers in cool climates, but they seem to be to me. How to save the seed? Really easy. Cut open the pepper, and unfortunately this is a unripe pepper, so not all of these seeds will be viable. But if this was a red pepper, you would just cut it open, save the seeds, dry them for a couple of days, and then store them. So you can have your seeds and eat the pepper too. So really easy to do. Better if it's ripe. Hardest part of saving pepper seeds to me is deciding which peppers to grow. And if you are going to grow a few different kinds and really don't want them to cross-pollinate, you should separate them by about 500 feet. So you can see that that's quite a distance, and especially if you're in a neighborhood where they're also growing lots of peppers. But crosses can be fun if you have the sort of room to play around or the interest to play around. I find that pepper crosses can be really interesting and really fun. Tomatoes are another super easy one to save, and you get to eat the tomato as well. So there's a wide diversity of heritage tomatoes. In fact, a lot of the whole thing with saving seeds is to preserve the diversity of these varieties that might really be important with climate change, because diversity is resilience. And if you look at old seed catalogs, there's actually more varieties in the older seed catalogs than there is in newer seed catalogs, because we've lost a lot of these varieties that maybe weren't big sellers because they were mostly produced in little ecoclimates that were quite different from the mainstream ecoclimates. And so I think it's our job almost as gardeners to preserve seed from things that do well in our garden. We might only get a few ripe tomatoes, but if we save seeds from those and plant those the following year, we might get more ripe tomatoes. And so on and on it goes. If you save the seeds from your earliest ripening tomato, what you are encouraging the plant to do is reproduce earlier tomatoes, to produce earlier tomatoes. It'll have it in its genes to produce earlier tomatoes. And that's why things like brandywine tomatoes, I don't even grow brandywine tomatoes because I don't have enough heat here to really get a good crop of brandywine tomatoes. They're delicious, I love them. But even in a greenhouse, I find I don't have enough heat to really get the kind of production that I'd like. So save tomatoes that are successful in your climate. One of my very favorite tomatoes is Yellow Coyote, and it might be the easiest tomato seed to save. What's happened to me in a couple of different climates now, both in Nanaimo and now in Qualicum, is that these Yellow Coyote tomatoes actually self-seeded in my garden, came up and produced tomatoes. Like a lot of tomatoes will self-seed, but not quickly enough for them to actually produce tomatoes the next year, whereas coyotes will tend to do that. So especially if you grow tomatoes in a pot, you mark your pot well, you add some nice fresh compost after the tomatoes are up. Sometimes you can grow, say, Yellow Coyote tomatoes in the same pot for 2 or 3 years, because if you just let a couple drop to the ground, they will tend to grow more plants the following year. So I originally got my seed from Carolyn Harriet, Seeds of Victoria. Sugar Shack Seeds is no longer in business, unfortunately, but I do have some Yellow Coyote seeds, and I'll make sure that they come out to the coast. Lots of great varieties. Cherry tomatoes will tend to do the best because they mature more quickly. So it's more likely that you can get a tomato crop that ripens, that you can save seed from. Paste tomatoes also sometimes will do very well. So if those are the tomatoes that mature in your climate, those are the ones you should try saving seeds from. Some of the larger beefsteak tomatoes really need that warmer summer or greenhouse to mature. And if you have a greenhouse, yeah, that's great. You know, save the seeds from those guys as well. Black cherry is one delicious tomato that I really like, and also coyote. The other tomato that I really like is this Arduino Polish paste. And I find that the only trouble with it is there's so few seeds. It's a very meaty tomato. It really is good for sauces or for paste tomatoes. And if you can get these tomatoes going, they are wonderful for preserving. Again, sometimes though, you only get 3 or 4 seeds per the whole tomato. The rest of it is just meat, but it makes it really a valuable tomato to save seed from because it's so meaty. Here's another great tomato. It's 75 to 85 days. Radiator Charlie's Mortgage Lifter Heirloom tomato. And I guess Radiator Charlie used this to pay his mortgage because the tomato was so delicious. And many of these heirloom or heritage tomatoes, they're good choices to save the seeds from, because they were saved for a reason, generally because they did well, they were productive, they were disease resistant. So how do you save seeds from tomato? You can still eat most of the tomato and still save some of the seeds. When you see this gel in here that surrounds the seeds, that's what you're after. So you can eat all these meaty parts, but you just need to scrape some of this gel that contains the seeds out of the tomato. So you just cut the tomato open, remove the gel. You can eat the rest of the tomato and put the gel with the seeds in a jar with some water. And you're going to want to let them sit about overnight, maybe 24 hours in that water so that they start to ferment, because that will actually help remove the gel from the seed. And it also breaks one of the dormancies in tomato seeds, so that when you do plant them, they will tend to germinate more quickly. But this is how you do it. You put the tomato seeds in some water in a jar or in a glass or any kind of container. Cover it, because the fruit flies absolutely adore it. So cover it with something, a lid or some plastic or saran wrap or whatever you can to cover it to keep the flies out. And then in a 24 hours, it usually works for me. If it doesn't float, if the seeds don't float to the top like this, maybe let it sit for a couple of days even. And once you start seeing the gel separating from the seeds, then what you can do is, what I usually do is I pour it through like a tea strainer or a sifter, and then turn the sifter upside down on a paper towel. And what will happen is the excess water and gel will tend to go through the sifter, and the seeds will actually stick on the paper towel. And sometimes I'll later on peel them off the towel. Sometimes I'll just plant them right with the piece of paper towel if they're separated enough. So it's a good time to try to separate them out a little bit while they're still wet. You're going to want to spread the seeds out on that paper towel and then let the paper towel completely dry. And then after it's completely dry, you can put it in a plastic bag, and remember, label, label, label. Squash, pumpkins, and cucumbers. This is where it gets a little bit more complex. Squash can be tricky because there's so much cross-pollination, and planting seeds from plants that have crossed with another member of the same genus and species can be sterile, which means that the plant will not even produce any squash. Or the other thing that can happen is the fruit could be inedible. So you could be in a situation where you've taken all this trouble to save the seeds from a squash, and then, you know, labeling it and putting it away and storing it and all this sort of thing. And then when you plant it the following year, you could either get a gourd, which is quite lovely looking, but might not have any edible flesh in it, so nothing to eat in it. Or you could get a vine that just takes up space in your garden, could take up 20, 30 feet in your garden, and not ever produce anything but male flowers, or not ever produce anything at all, just vine. So make sure when you're saving seeds from squash that you take this into consideration. So you can see here that the squash family includes all these following species. So watermelons and citrons, they're both Citrullus vulgaris. So watermelons will cross with citrons. Cucumis mellow, muskmelons, cantaloupes, and honeydew. If you plant more than one of these, they will cross with one another. So one good solution is to only plant cantaloupes one year, only plant honeydews another year, if you want to save seeds from them. Cucumbers will tend to you can save seeds from cucumbers because there's really not a lot of there's no other plant commonly grown here that has the same genus and the same species. So there's no other Cucumis sativus here, but cucumbers won't cross with these other things, but they can cross with themselves. So if you grow, say, a Persian cucumber and a straight 8, they might cross, and then when you plant the seeds, you'll get a mix, or you might not get anything. So solution there is to plant one type of cucumber. Cucurbit maxima. So this is where it starts getting tricky, because there's a lot of squashes that have the same genus and species. Banana squashes, buttercup squashes, Hubbard squashes, turban squashes, and some pumpkins, but not all of them, will cross with each other. And the results, again, are unpredictable. So this Kusha squash does pretty good if you just plant one kind. But then again, when you get Cucurbita moschata, there's butternut, Kusha, and cheese squashes. Now, to my knowledge, golden Kusha and cheese squashes aren't grown a lot here. So butternut is one. If you get open pollinated seeds, you can reliably, pretty reliably, if you don't get a hybrid butternut squash seed, you can save seeds from butternut squash and they should come true. But then when we get into Cucurbita pepo, you also get these huge assortment of things that can cross with each other. So acorn squash, crookneck squash, scallop squash, spaghetti squash, zucchini squash, gourds, and a whole other part of the pumpkin family. Those all can cross with each other, lending to unpredictable results. So this is a really beneficial chart to have, because this will show you which things will cross with each other. So there's either no use saving seeds, or you have to use special techniques. The Lagenaria ciceraria, the hard-shelled gourds, well, they aren't edible anyway, and they cross wildly anyway, so it's okay to save seeds from those. And the loofahs, as long as you only grow one type, one kind of loofah, you can save seeds from loofahs. And then there's also the coyotes, which if you just grow one type, you can get away with it. But this Cucurbita pepo is the most difficult to save seeds from, and unfortunately, it includes a lot of our favorites. So patty pan, zucchinis, crookneck, acorn, and pumpkins. So if you grow more than one of these, or your neighbor is growing some, you will not get reliably what you were hoping to get because of that cross-pollination. There's ways to isolate the flowers, which we'll talk about, but these two squash can cross-pollinate. So the acorn squash and this particular variety of pumpkin can cross-pollinate, and you don't know what you will get when you plant the seeds. I've seen some comments on some gardening sites where people have gotten weird squashes, and other people have responded, oh, your plants must have cross-pollinated. And it's kind of wrong to think if you're planting two plants in your garden and the bee takes the pollen from one flower of one, say the acorn squash, and then brings it to the pumpkin flower, that particular year you will get a weird acorn or a weird pumpkin. That is not going to happen. But if you take the seed from things that have been cross-pollinated and plant them, that's when you get the weird different types of pumpkin or squash that you might have never seen before and might or might not have edible fruit. So within the year that these two things are growing together, it's not a problem. If your seed was true and good, then you will get that plant. And the only thing happens if the people who saved the seed before you that you planted, if they let something cross-pollinate, then you might get a strange cross. So these two will also cross-pollinate, the zucchini and the patty pan. Part of me would like to see what would happen if I let that happen. So maybe I will try it someday. But I have a lot of room. And so if one squash plant doesn't produce, it's no big deal, you know, and so I can experiment. So different species don't cross-pollinate with each other. So one from either species can be grown. So if we look back on this chart, So yes, if we planted, these are all related family-wise, but if we planted one banana squash, so one of the members of this family, so say we planted a banana squash, and then we planted a butternut squash, they wouldn't cross-pollinate because although they're the same genus, they're not the same species. So only the ones in this list here following that are the same genus and the same species will cross. So we can save, say, we can plant an acorn squash and save the seeds from it as long as we or our neighbors are not planting crookneck, scallop, spaghetti, squash, zucchini, gourds, or some of the pumpkins. But if we just planted acorn and banana squash and muskmelons, we could save the seeds from all of those if our neighbor wasn't growing them. Nope. Previous. So you can do one variety of crookneck or zucchini or pumpkin, one butternut, one watermelon, one cantaloupe, one loofah, one hard gourd, and one cucumber, as long as they are not the same genus and species without crossing each other. So butternut is the easiest, and I could live on butternut, so I'm all good with that. Comes from a family that has very few commonly grown relatives in this country. Most of them grow in other parts of the world, in the Middle East. And so the chances of cross-pollinating with other squashes is slim. So it's a really good one to start with. You can ferment squash seeds just like tomatoes, but many times, actually, if you are storing these winter squash and then you cut them open, sometimes the process will start right inside the fruit. So whether you fermented the seeds or not, rub them underwater between your fingers and thoroughly clean them to remove the naturally occurring gel, because until that gel breaks down a little bit, the seeds will not germinate. And so you'll find in, if you've stored, like I had some pumpkins that lasted all winter long from mid-October harvest. We were still eating them in March. But when I cut them open, the seeds were starting to sprout because the gel that was keeping the seeds dormant had deteriorated. So you need to get that gel off of that, most of the goo off of the seeds to prevent the gel from preventing the seeds from germinating, so that when you do plant them, they'll germinate. So you want to thoroughly clean them and then dry them on a piece of paper towel or a cloth and wait till they're a bit almost brittle feeling. Try not to use heat because the moisture might make them germinate, and then store them in a cool, dry place. The other thing you can do with squash is you can start to get tricky with hand pollination. And so one of the things, if you're growing a couple of the same members of the same genus and species, then what you can do is you can hand pollinate them and then isolate them. And so what you do is you take a paintbrush or a Q-tip and you gather some of the pollen and from the male and then put it on the female. The trick here is to do it very early in the morning. So when you have both male and female flowers, what is good practice is to walk through your garden in the late afternoon or evening and find the flowers that look like they're just about ready to open. And you can tell those flowers are very fleshy. They're showing yellow at their tips. And that's how you know they will be open very soon. They're ready to open the next morning. And what you do on the same plant is choose a pair of male and female flowers, or they can be on adjoining plants as long as they're the same kind of plant. And what you do is you actually seal them shut. So you can see this is the female flower, and it's got the squash behind it, and it's sealed shut. And this is the male plant, male flower. It does not have the squash sitting behind it, but it's also sealed shut. And you have to do this gently so that you don't damage the flower. And so I use a twist tie or a really delicate piece of twine, and really be gentle with this, because you don't want, you do want to isolate it and don't let any pollen off that flower or off the male flower or into the female flower. But also that female flower you'll have to reseal that female flower after you pollinate it. So you have to be very careful that you don't rip the petals. You don't want to do the damage to the flower. So the flowers will be ready early in the morning, and look at some of the other flowers to see if they have opened, and probably if they have, yours are ready as well. And so most flowers will actually open before dawn. So get to the garden as early as possible, and it'll increase the rate of success. By noon, the good time for pollination and fertilization has ended, because the stigma of the plant actually will dry up and won't receive and allow the pollen tube to germinate, the pollen to germinate into a pollen tube that will fertilize the seed. So by noon, it won't work so well. So the first thing that you do is remove the petals from the male flower and set it aside. And when you open the female flower, you do not want to let any insects near it. Open the female flower, and then you can use the flower itself. You can see the stigma is the main part of the female flower. It should be moist. It should be wet. It should be kind of sticky. And what you can do is you can just take the male part, you can see the stamen right here, and brush it onto the female flower. So take the male flower and brush it on. You can also use a Q-tip. You can also use a paintbrush to brush some of the pollen onto the stigma of the female plant, remembering that the female plant has the little squash behind it. Then you have to reseal right away. You have to reseal the female flower so that no other insects get in there to cross-pollinate it. And hopefully, the flower will stay intact and no other insects can get in. So do not remove the seeds that you are keeping for planting from the squash until 3 weeks after harvest, because they will continue to ripen. So by doing this isolation, eventually this flower will fall off, but that is when the squash begins to grow and develop, and after the flower falls off, nothing else can pollinate it anyway. So leave that flower on until it falls off by itself. And then when the squash develops and is ready to pick, then leave that squash until 3 weeks after harvest. Now, if you're harvesting winter squash, that rind has to be quite stiff. You shouldn't be able to dent it with your finger. And that's when you know it's ready to harvest. And so winter squashes are actually easier to determine when they're ready to get the seeds out, because 3 weeks after you have harvested winter squash, then you can cut it open and save the seeds. With the summer squash, it's a little bit more difficult, because the summer squash, it takes a really long time for that squash to ripen. And you know, if you've ever grown zucchini, you know how big they get and they're not even starting to ripen. Zucchini can be, you know, a couple of kilos or more big and still be bright green. And the seeds are prominent in it, but they might not be completely ripe. With cucumbers and summer squash, you really want those plants to get really big, change color, and then wait, after they've changed color, wait 3-4 weeks or more to dig the seeds out. And so they're a little bit trickier. And so especially with zucchini, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger before they start changing color and actually ripening the seeds that are inside them. So summer squash will need to actually change colors before you even harvest them for seed, which means that the plant will probably slow down or stop producing new zucchinis, which in some case could be a blessing for your neighbors, for your friends, and for yourself if you're busy preserving all this zucchini. But a squash plant will only set a certain amount of fruit. And then after that, the male pollen is still good, but the female flowers just won't accept the pollen. So if you want to do hand pollination, pollinate the first few female flowers, and then you'll be assured to get some that are viable to save the seeds from. So here's the here's a zucchini that has been kept for seed. And even if the squash isn't quite mature yet, you can still harvest it if it's close to maturity, or if it starts to turn color, or if it's just so big, because what will happen is that the seeds will continue to mature somewhat. It is best practice to let the zucchini and the summer squash develop a hard shell that you can't dent as well. But very few of us actually have let zucchini or cucumber get to that point where it has developed a hard shell. But that's when you are sure that the seeds are viable. Kale, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and the rest of that family. Cabbage family has cross-pollination issues as well. Even though it's a perfect flower, it can still cross-pollinate. And if you want something that is true to what you're growing, true to type, unless you like experimenting, only let one of this family go to seed at a time. So the cabbage family includes all these different species, and they will all cross-pollinate with one another. So mustard greens, black mustard, rape, Siberian kale, rutabaga, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, and kale, they'll all cross-pollinate. Turnips and cabbage, all of these on here will cross-pollinate. So again, unless you like experimenting, only one to go to seed every year. Here's typical Brassica flowers when they go to seed. You can see they're quite prolific. And then they'll start to dry into these seed pods. When I find that when the little birds start to peck at the seed pods, that's how I know that they're ready, and that's when I harvest them. So there's lots of different types of kale. I find Red Russian is still my favorite, but now I have lots of crosses with that. I eat kale a lot, especially in the winter, and I'd never be without it. So I also let lots of it just self-seed in my garden. Kale plants will get very, very big when they flower. Saying that, if you have a small garden and you still want to save seeds, you can definitely cut the plants back. It will take a little bit from the plant and you won't get as much seeds, but you might not need that much seeds anyway. And it is good to let a few plants go to seed. They suggest at least 7 kale plants to go to seed. So if you cut them all short, at least you'll have a little bit of diversity between the kale plants. So don't be afraid to cut them back if you don't have room and just leave a few stems on each one of the plants. But it is good to have that little bit of diversity in between, so that you get more resilience from your kale plants. So let the seed pods dry in the plant if you can, but if you have to harvest early again, you can. What I've done is I've actually, instead of the whole plant, because it's really, really big, I've cut branches and I've put them in paper bags and then hung the paper bags up to dry. And you can tell that the seed is really ready because the kale seed pods shatter very easily, releasing the seeds. I often use a big bowl like this. So I put a big bowl underneath the all the branches, and I just kind of squeeze the pods and the seeds come flying out. And maybe I don't get all of them, which is probably why my compost has kale seed in it. But I've never been unhappy with that. And it also actually burns really well. I find that I use kale stems sometimes for kindling, so that's another option. But after you get the seeds, and you'll get a lot of pods in the bowl as well. And so one of the ways to deal with that is to just hold the bowl in your hand and blow into the bowl. And what you'll find that the chaff, so the old dried up seed pods, will actually kind of fly out because it's lighter in weight than the seeds. And so the chaff flies out, or you can do it on a slightly windy day where you blow on the bowl and the chaff flies up and the wind sort of blows it off. And that means you don't have to blow quite so hard. The seeds will roll back in the bottom, and repeatedly doing that will clean out most of the chaff. Some First Nations traditional stories have indicated that it's actually good for the plant to be planted, the seed to be planted with some of the chaff. And it's only our modern seed packaging and expectations that the chaff doesn't, that our seed is clean. Some believe that the seeds actually will do better if planted with the chaff itself, which in a way makes sense because that's what happens in nature. So if you're saving seed for your personal use, you do not have to clean this seed meticulously. The only reason it is cleaned is that people that bought a seed packet probably of seed that had the chaff in it would probably complain because seed is sold by weight. Most seed is sold by weight. Some is sold by piece, but most seed is sold by weight. And if it included the chaff, people might not be so happy with that. Radishes are also a member of the Brassica family. And so remember that if your neighbor is growing kale that is going to seed at the same time, it may cross with other radishes. So it may cross with your radishes. So grow only one radish type at a time for best results. But many times you can get seed from radish before, very early in the season, before some of these other things are ready to go to flower and to seed. So it's worth a try. Alta Globe is a good one from West Coast Seeds because it's 28 days to maturity. And so if you just grow this one type of radish and you're not letting other brassicas go to seed at the same time, go to flower at the same time, because that's when they cross-pollinate, then you can save your radish seed. So there's lots of different reasons to save seeds. It increases your self-reliance. I found when West Coast Seeds ran out of seeds during the pandemic, that I had no problem planting a full garden because I had enough seeds saved. It saves tons of money on seeds. So, if you're an avid gardener and you know you're going to keep gardening, why not have your own seeds instead of spending money on them year after year? It helps you take control of your food supply. I really had no need to go to the grocery store the first, when COVID hit. I was lucky. I had frozen some fish and frozen some protein, but also just with the beans and the vegetables that I had, I probably could have survived pretty well, and planting a garden and harvesting from my overwintered garden. I was still harvesting in March. So really important, I think, in today's world, so unpredictable, so much climate change happening. Our food supply is going to be more and more threatened. Places like California are drying up even worse than we are. So by taking control of your food and your food prices, it's a really good thing to do. Protect and preserve pollinators. When plants go to seed, they produce a tremendous amount of flowers, and the pollinators are all over them and love them. So that's another good reason. It gives power to your local food systems, adds resilience. The seeds that do good here might not do as well as someplace else, and vice versa. So it does give power to your local food system to grow and save some of your own seeds and share them. Also, it helps you to learn to handle adversity. Because if you lose part of your pepper crop to frost, the part that does maybe survive, save the seeds from that. The kale that survives the heat wave, save the seeds from that. And by doing that, you are breeding in resilience and the ability to handle adverse conditions into your garden. And the ability to breed your own varieties with what you like and what you don't like. So again, I weed out the kale that doesn't taste good to me. I weed out the turnip greens that are too hairy. Because I'm breeding seeds and plants for my particular tastes and for climate resilience. So really good reasons to save seeds. Now's the time to start looking at your garden and seeing what seeds you can save. Saving seeds connects us to the miracles of life. And I love this picture of the seed because it reminds us that seeds are living and breathing beings, and they need to be cared for as such. So hopefully this will help you save some seeds. If you have some questions, feel free to email me. Helene will pass along my email. I still answer questions in gratitude that I've been able to do something that I love all my life and make a living from it. So thank you for helping me do that.